Most mainstream games are relatively easy to understand and play. When you boot up the game, you usually basically know what you're getting into. You know what to expect, or at least you know what made you curious enough to buy the game in the first place. However, this was not the case for me when I booted up the PS1 style retro puzzle solving game Fatum Betula. I knew neither what to expect nor why I was so intrigued when I, after browsing the Switch store for interesting cheap games, randomly found the bundle Paratopic plus Fatum Betula. The cover and the Latin title just piqued my interest. On playing it though, I was hit with an atmosphere unlike any other game I've played before. And on top of its unique atmosphere, it also explores what I think are some interesting and thought-provoking ideas and motifs, especially when you get to the endings, of which there are no less than 10. What are those ideas and what is the game trying to convey? That's what I want to discuss today. The game mechanics are deceptively simple in Fatum Betula, but unconventional. You start off at the bottom of a staircase with a locked door at one end of the room, and a set of stairs leading up to a seemingly never-ending corridor upon first loading a fresh save. At the top of the staircase is a small birch tree growing out of a pool of water. I can say that I, for one, was immediately left wondering what I was supposed to do at this stage, but apparently if we wait while staring into the abyss here for a while, a snake-like creature emerges from the other end of the tunnel and tells us a story about how the world and this birch tree are stuck in limbo, between the living and the dead, but that it will provide us with the tools to change that by feeding the birch using a set of vials it gives us. It says that the game world and the eponymous birch tree, Fatum Betula, or Birch of Fate in English, are a synecdoche, which is when a word for a part of something is used to refer to the whole, or vice versa. For example, you might say the crown to refer to the whole of Great Britain as a country, or on the other hand, France to refer specifically to the French football team. And yes, I mean real football, not fake football. In the game though, this idea means that basically whatever happens to the birch tree also happens to the game world as a whole. They're part and parcel of the same thing. This introduces the central game mechanic. As we explore the world from here on out, we can collect various liquids in these 3 vials, and then come back to the tree to release the contents into the pool it drinks from, each separate liquid leading to a separate ending. These are the game mechanics forming the basis for 10 separate endings, 10 separate fates for the Birch of Fate, which I'll get back to later. First though, I think one of the most interesting things about this game is the way it manages to leverage atmosphere and use the PS1 era graphics to its advantage in order to create a totally unique and otherworldly state of mind in the player. The game's soundtrack is very limited, but I'd like you to take a quick listen to the track Cherry Daydream, which is my favorite and really encapsulates what the game's atmosphere is like. Isn't there just something so serene about that simple track, especially when heard as you're walking around in this strange environment? It's repetitive, but also serene and calming. This atmosphere is definitely intentional, and is backed up by a number of other details in the game too. Everything is just a little bit off, but not necessarily in a way that makes it scary, despite the bundle being supposedly a horror bundle. For example, the door you walk through at the start of the game is straight on one side like any door, but once you get to the other side, it's at a weird angle, leading straight out into an environment of greenery. And this other corridor towards the end of the game seems to go on forever and turns, getting increasingly angular as you progress through it. On top of this, all the NPCs are completely unique, and there's never any clarity as to who they are and why they are where they are. a zombie man who got the short end of the stick after becoming immortal and now rots perpetually, for some reason having really, really long legs? A wizard living in a library underneath a well who can't open doors? A demon with his entrails hanging out who wants to look at this painting for some reason? The characters make no sense, the places they can be found make no sense, and their goals, more or less, make no sense. In short, almost nothing about the game makes any sense, on the logical level at least. This lack of any rational explanation for anything that happens in the game, combined with the vague visuals afforded by the low-quality PS1 graphics and musical atmosphere, cements the idea, in my head at least, that the game is essentially a dream. But although nothing makes sense on the surface, like in a dream, there are certain themes and motifs throughout the game which do have interesting meanings, and I'd like to talk a bit about those now. I think there are two specific themes which are most obvious from the get-go. As a player, your role in the game is essentially to determine the fate of the Birch of Fate, the Fatum Betula. And because the Birch is a synecdoche in relation to the game world, whatever you choose to do to the Birch also happens to the world. This cements the concept of fate as a very important theme. The second main theme is a bit less obvious but still very clear. At the beginning of the game in the stone corridor, the strange worm creature says, "Consider the Birch and our world to be one and the same, a synecdoche. Both are kept between the living and the dead. This ancient water holds its roots in limbo. As such, everything here has failed to accept entropy." In other words, the world of Fatum Betula is a world which has been frozen in time. In its default state before you do anything, the water holds its roots in limbo, and so nothing ever progresses. Your task as the player is to determine its future by choosing what kind of liquid you want to feed to it. As I've said, each of the liquids you can feed it constitutes a distinct ending, so as the player, you're essentially a being with the power to determine what happens to this world, which has been frozen in time. Therefore, the second most obvious theme is the idea of eternity, or more specifically, being stuck in a kind of superposition. The world's fate having been undecided since its inception, leaving it in an eternal state of non-moving. The world's fate then falls to you. Will you let it remain in limbo forever, or choose to put an end to its frozen state and provide some kind of resolution for it? Now, there are no less than 10 endings for the game, as I said, some of them making at least a modicum of sense, and others, well, let's just say it's not exactly clear-cut what they mean. In the interest of time, I'll focus on the endings I find the most symbolically interesting, and use them as an opportunity to point out the most striking aspects of the game. The first ending, or more precisely the 0th ending, is called Nothing to Worry About. And to access it, we first have to proceed right from the main forest area you enter into and get to the Cherry Daydream section. In this Asian-style house in the middle of a large pond, there's a bed you can sleep in, upon which the dreamy environment will transform into something more like a nightmare, with the kanji power and death appearing in the sky as everything warps in an incredibly glitchy way. The game once again taking advantage of the peculiarities of PS1 graphics to reinforce the sense that this is all a dream. What does this mean? Well, although from what I could tell these kanji don't mean anything specific when taken together, the reference to power and death probably refers to the power of death, as the endings and items which can be found in this section of the game all relate to death. Now, to obtain the 0th ending, we must proceed all the way around the pond to this place where we'll find a grave, where we can cut a hangman's noose, and the ghost of a fisherman will appear, probably the same fisherman who appears in this painting in the house at the center of the pond. He asks us to feed a certain fruit to a mammal with a beating heart, in order to turn its blood into some kind of poison, and then, in turn, feed its blood to the birch of fate, in order to put an end to the frozen dream world, telling us we need non-existence. I'd like to note the fact that the character's face is a hand with an eye on it, as this interestingly seems to be a symbol from the religion of Jainism. In Jainism, a hand like this essentially symbolizes the end of what's called samsara, or the endless cycle of life, which is very fitting given the character's apparent motive of putting an end to the world. If we feed the fruit to this cat creature in the main forest, known as the beast, it dies and falls over like a chess piece, allowing us to grab its blood and poison the birch, resulting in the ending, nothing to worry about. Since the birch and the world are a synecdoche, this ending essentially represents the total annihilation of the world. If the birch is poisoned and dies, the world literally dies with it, leaving nothing at all. On the surface, this seems to play off of the philosophical question of what it means for nothing to exist. See, it's not just a question of everyone being dead. No, the world itself, the very fabric of reality, has ceased to exist. As the game says, nothing. There is nothing. What exactly does this mean? Well, you could construe it as a kind of freedom from worry, as the name of the ending suggests, but is it truly desirable? The game leaves that up to you. To obtain the second ending I want to mention, you also have to visit the Cherry Daydream section. And like I said, it also has to do with death. What is it? Well, like I said at the beginning, there's this immortal character in a house, and a wizard living in a well in one section of the game. The immortal character wants to die, but can't. The wizard, in stark contrast to this, is trying to create an antidote to death, but in order to do so, he needs the severed head of a previous immortal. His only problem is that he's been struck by a terrible and most inconvenient curse. The curse of not being able to open wooden doors, of all things. Yeah, that sounds like something I'd probably dream about. So anyway, he needs you to go get this head for him. And this brings us back to the Cherry Daydream area, because to kill the undead guy, you need this fish, the very same fish which killed the fisherman from before, as you see in the painting. You can get it with a fishing rod from this boat, since it swims around in the pond. And like I said, since this fish can kill an immortal, it once again cements the role of the Cherry Daydream section of the game as a kind of homage to death, with kanji in the sky emphasizing the power of death, the ghost of a fisherman who wants to literally kill the world, a fish with the power to kill immortals, and finally, as a cherry on top, cherry blossoms, representing the cycle of life and death. Anyway, upon giving the fish to the zombie guy and taking his head to the wizard, he gets real excited and brews a potion for us right away. And when we feed this potion to the Birch of Fate, we get the ending we've been waiting for. Forever. Being the exact opposite of the previous ending, this one asks, is it really worth it to live forever? On the one hand, you obviously have the opportunity to explore everything there is to explore about reality. Dying stars can be viewed. All secrets can be uncovered. But what does that leave us with? Nothing but eternity. If all secrets are uncovered, everything that was once meaningful has thereby been rendered meaningless, as the game so succinctly puts it. Taken together with the previous ending, you could interpret them as asking the question, if you have the choice of whether to allow the world to exist forever, or to erase it from existence and from all memory, would immortality really be the better option? The wizard guy is very excited about the prospect of living forever, but there's also a certain immaturity to his character. There's a kind of naive excitement to him, as if he's selfishly attached to the idea of immortality without really understanding what it truly means. On the other hand, the fisherman's ghost is calm, and he seems like he might just have learned from experience that immortality isn't something you actually want. Perhaps non-existence really is the better option. There are a few other interesting endings, as well as a few joke ones that I don't really know what to say about. My favorite out of these is probably the one where you turn everyone into skeletons. I love this background track. Anyways, you can get one of the more meaningful endings if you kill the beast, the cat creature, without first giving him the poisoned fruit. You can then collect beast blood, which can be fed directly to the birch to obtain the murderer's ending. In line with the theme of the birch being a synecdoche for the game world, this ending represents what would happen if you cursed it to exist in a state of eternal violence. And unlike the first two endings we discussed, this one is just plain bad. Everyone now seeks to kill each other, therefore society never emerges, and every conflict ends with a knife drawn. Thematically, just as the Forever ending highlights the human desire for immortality, this one highlights the human tendency for violence and the consequences of choosing to harm others and start conflicts rather than trying to find peaceful solutions. There's also an ending you can get if you fish one of the normal fish that aren't poisonous and feed it to the beast. See, apparently the beast comes from an OPEC country or something, and gives you a bunch of oil after he's been fed. An interesting gift to give to a random stranger, to say the least. You can feed this oil to the birch, getting you the parasites ending. With oil serving as a symbol for the littering and contamination of the earth, this ending is equally straightforward to interpret, and clearly expresses the consequences of global warming and the slow death of nature as a result of human short-sightedness and the pursuit of wealth. Finally, the last ending I want to mention is called the cycle, and can be obtained if you go through this random opening in the bushes next to the beast, and then proceed through another section until you eventually are teleported to a place called Suburbia, where you'll find a childlike apparition with a camera for a head, watching TV. If you use the knife to kill it, you can obtain your blood. A rather ominous name. Going back and feeding this straight to the birch gets you the cycle ending. Why cycle? Because this ending seems to emphasize certain cyclical aspects of life, but more specifically the cyclical way that bad parenting is perpetuated through the generations. A product of the world that raised you. I don't blame you, though you've murdered the child of your blood, as is what previously happened to you. I think this ending is using the murder of the child watching TV as a representation of how parents, in a sense, murder their children metaphorically by raising and bringing them up in the same toxic way that they themselves were brought up. The child having a camera for a head could be a metaphor for how children are blank slates, which soak up whatever you give them, just like how a camera records whatever happens to be in front of it when you press the record button. If you push your children too hard, they learn that pushing one's children too hard is just the natural order of things, and if you beat them, then beating your children becomes normalized in their minds. So in turn, when they get their own children, they give them the same treatment, and the cycle continues. To sum up my impression of this game, I believe Fatum Betula is a kind of symbolical or archetypal dream. You can think about it as a dream that you yourself may have had, designed by your unconscious mind to inform you about the choices you have and encourage you to make the right ones in your life. There's a lot of nonsense in it, sure, just like there's a lot of nonsense in any dream, but it's not all nonsense. You may not have the power to decide what happens to the entire world, since you don't have the birch of fate in front of you in real life, but like in the dream, you do have the power to influence the direction of the world. Will you choose to contribute to a world of violence, where nobody can come to understand one another? Or perhaps you had a bad upbringing. Will you then choose to perpetuate the cycle of bad parenting, thereby poisoning the world just a little bit more? Or will you break the cycle and raise your children differently? Likewise, we could interpret the birch as a symbol for the world, like I said, but interpret you, the player, as a stand-in for humanity as a whole, rather than you as an individual. If we do that, then contaminating the birch with oil expresses the civilizational tendency we have to contaminate and exploit the world rather than to preserve it. The game becomes an expression of the choice to either continue living as parasites, willfully ignorant of the consequences, or to choose to feed the earth something other than oil. The most metaphysical of the endings, though, are obviously nothing to worry about and forever. These are a little bit harder to understand in terms of humanity's choices, but maybe we could use the giant hand symbol from the fisherman's head as a jumping off point. Maybe the forever ending expresses the all too common human desire to live forever. In some ways, this desire is, after all, the absolute epitome of selfishness and greed, which leads to all the other negative things we've discussed. Violence, contamination, abuse. Humans naturally desire more, no matter how much we already have, and we will commit violent acts, contaminate and abuse others to get it. In the last analysis, perhaps it amounts to the desire to live forever, to enjoy the spoils of life for all eternity. And like I mentioned earlier, the hand symbol represents the end of samsara, the concept in Eastern tradition describing the endless cycle of life. So perhaps the fisherman's desire to put an end to the birch represents humanity's recognition that you can't actually keep pursuing more and more forever. The recognition that true meaning can actually be found somewhere else. Perhaps true meaning, paradoxically, can be found in absolute nothingness. Honestly, I have no idea. I just really like the atmosphere and weird qualities of this game. They were just begging to be analysed, so that's what I tried to do. If you found my review interesting though, please like, subscribe, leave some feedback in the comments, and check out some of my previous analyses. Thanks for watching.